Vodacom has entered into exclusive discussions with shareholders of Neotel. The deal is reportedly worth around $500 million. And of course, this has just broken on Sense here in South Africa. Joining me at the desk, CNBC Africa's Natasha Jacobs. And of course, Natasha is the anchor of Tech at Work. So following the sector, obviously, quite frequently, Natasha. So certainly just looking at the announcement today, I mean, it has been talked about. There's been a lot of speculation for some time. And we're talking about what this will mean for Vodacom, why Neotel shareholders potentially also will have to look at this as a favorable deal for them. It's all around the fiber network, it's all around the customer base, and it's also all around spectrum and deployment of LTE services.
Well, Sam, it's good to be here. And yes, it has been quite a few months since speculation started, actually since May. A lot of players in the mix, a lot of saying, no, that's not us. But obviously now we now know it is Vodacom. Yeah, let's start with the key assets. Of course, a interesting customer base, 150 traditional consumers, plus minus, and about 2,000 enterprise and business consumers. Big disproportionate numbers, but please remember enterprises spend a lot of money, so quite a sizable chunk there. Fairly extensive fiber optic network. Currently high-speed fiber broadband networks, of course, are crucial for the rollout of 4G, the next generation. And Neotel currently sitting with about 8,000 kilometers of metro fiber and has access to a significant additional 12,000 fiber backbone linking to the major centers in South Africa. So obviously Cape Town, Johannesburg, all the big ones, and then the big daddy. That's the radio frequency.
Yeah, and of course the question is also whether ICASA, and that's one of the regulatory approvals, will approve of this deal, because it certainly does potentially put Vodacom ahead of MTN in the deployment of 4G. Just to put this into perspective, from a global perspective, Vodafone is doing this across the globe. They recently bought Cable and Wireless that last year for £1.1 billion. That also extending their fiber network and fixed line assets in the UK. They've been doing this in Spain as well as Portugal. And in New Zealand, they also bought the operator there, Telstra, Clear, that for $400 million. So what we're seeing is mobile looking for more fixed line assets. And that, of course, is what we're seeing here in South Africa. Let's get some perspective from the markets. Sasfin's David Shapiro is on the line. David, thanks for joining us. What do you make of this deal? I mean, how does it put the likes of Vodacom ahead of an MTN?
Well, that's the whole discussion point. If you've been following Vodacom, and I have to tell you, one of the reasons that I've been buying Vodacom is rather because of its high cash generation and very high dividend yield. This is a share that gives you a yield of over 6% and generates a lot of cash. They have been lagging in Africa, and one of the big worries about shareholders has been, where's it going to grow? If it grows into Africa and tries to take on MTN or any of the other cell phone companies, we know it's going to create lower margins. So this seems to be the right way to go. They're staying back home and increasing their penetration here in areas which are very interesting. In fact, I think they're going to give Telkom a big challenge now. Telkom are now trying to also get into this area and refocus the business. And what better partner could they have than Neotel? So isn't it rather odd? They came out of Telkom and seem to be now taking Telkom in an area of business that was very aligned to where to Telkom's business.
Exactly. Who would have seen this? I think back in 2009 when that happened. But essentially, I mean, what it does is it really does launch a massive competitive attack against the likes of Telkom. I mean, if you just look at the market share, though, just if Neotel is added to Vodacom, if you look at their market share in the enterprise space, only around 15%. So it shows that Telkom still can be a major player, but what it does mean is that, and according to the SENS announcement and the press announcement, they will be able to be more competitive and a more effective player. And of course, from a consumer perspective, that's good news for us.
Well, of course, you see also where Vodacom are, they're not held down by any kind of legacy issues. They don't have to restructure, which Telkom has to go through. Telkom's got to go through major restructuring and refocusing of its business, whereas they can come in, take Neotel, which it's been moderately successful. I don't think it's knocked the lights out, but this does allow Vodacom now to expand into the business applications area. Yes, they've been in business and they've been very big there, and I don't think this is designed around individuals, but it's certainly going to make it a very competitive player in a business solution. So I look forward to it. I think the market's reacted negatively, but we can't tell whether this is because of the whole market's down because of the American issues, or whether this is a response to the actual deal. But there might be a bit of hesitancy in terms of, will this affect their profitability? Will it affect their ability to pay these very attractive dividends?
But you bring up the most important point there, is where is Vodacom going to show growth going forward now? And because MTN certainly has that first mover advantage and the network set up in Africa, this is really a space they could potentially play. And if you listen to what I was saying about their strategy, Vodafone, that is globally, this is what they've been doing. So perhaps they've been taking that direction from the mothership. Yeah,
and certainly whether they can now transport this into the rest of Africa is debatable, because it does. You have to lay down a lot of cable. There's a lot of fixed investment that goes into it. But I think what I like about this is that Neotel's already done that. They've disrupted our roads for the last few years. We've had to bypass all those little channels in the road. So they're there already. They've put down the cable. So all that Vodacom has to do now is to get the benefit of that. So to me, we haven't got the details. There's no news around it. We don't know that much about Neotel because it hasn't been a public company. But I think when the documents come out, we'll be able to have a much closer look at it. Exactly. But certainly it looks like Vodacom wants this to go ahead. And in the meantime, we're seeing numbers like $500 million, and that certainly has not been cleared by either of the companies or communicated that number, that is. But we wait for that. David, thanks for your time and, of course, analysis. That's not a lot of money. $500 million. Well, relative to where Vodacom's share cap is here, it can afford it. Yeah, well, there we go. That is certainly what we're hearing from you right now, and we'll see how the share price responds in the next hour or so. And of course, tomorrow will be the day where we look at how shareholders view this one. But David Shapiro from Sasfin, thanks for your time. Natasha, just looking back at some of the comments that were made there, it certainly seems like David, a big fan of this deal going ahead. We know that Sasfin Fund there has a big shareholding in Vodacom right now. But I wonder what could be the potential hurdles for a deal like this going ahead. I mean, how would you see the competition authorities viewing this? How would you see the likes of ICASA viewing two key players, but obviously one a lot smaller, but two players coming together?
Sam, it's all about competition. It's all about market fairness. If you look on the regulatory side, spectrum obviously is an asset that Neotel is sitting with, but it's not a guarantee that if you buy the company you get the spectrum. It has to be approved by ICASA. And spectrum, of course, highly contested area. It's all tied to 4G. It's on the back of analog to digital. So that might just be the complication. And the big question, I think, is if that is off the cards, will the deal be as well?
I mean, do you think that's the prize? Do you think spectrum is the prize above the enterprise customers that they bring on board? Because as I said, 15% market share is what they'll have if the deal goes ahead.
I think it's a bit of both, but between fibre and spectrum, I think those are the two strong caveats. It's either or both, and I'm sure that Vodacom is hoping for both.
Well, let's get some perspective now. We've got Worldwide Works, Arthur Goldstuck, joining us on the line. Thanks for joining us, Arthur. So, this is a big deal in the South African context. If you look at the likes of Neotel being bought out by Vodacom, do you think Vodacom needs Neotel to be able to grow more effectively and provide the rollout of 4G services and the likes in South Africa?
Good afternoon, Samantha. Not necessarily in terms of 4G services, but certainly in terms of the fibre backbone that Neotel has built, and particularly, as David had mentioned, in the urban areas, you have a situation where Neotel has dug up the road, they've put in a huge amount of fiber optic cable, which would give Vodacom a massive leap forward in terms of being able to provide fiber to businesses, and then ultimately also, although this isn't what this particular division is geared towards, fiber to the home. What you see is a situation where MTN has a very powerful business division, MTN Business, based on its fiber capacity. Vodacom doesn't have that kind of capacity. By buying Neotel, it saves them having to invest probably more than they're paying for Neotel in building that same kind of capacity. Suddenly they can compete head-to-head with MTN Business. And also, it gives them access to additional spectrum that is in very short supply at the moment, very scarce, and it also gives them further expertise and access to, or greater access to, the undersea cables that Neotel has had the management contract for in this country.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Arthur, why don't you think that the deal here is not about bringing fibre to the home? Because certainly, if you speak to people, behind the scenes, they are saying that one of the key areas that they see the likes of Vodacom being able to differentiate itself and certainly being able to help South Africa move to where the rest of the world is when it comes to bringing fibre to the home. Certainly, we know we're behind in the fixed line space when it comes to that.
There's no question that would be a second phase strategy, but first phase is where the money is, and where the money is right now in fibre is fibre to the business. Fibre to the home is still very expensive. You need to have an infrastructure and a service geared towards running fibre into suburbs as opposed to into densely occupied business areas in the city. That's the low-hanging fruit for Vodacom right now. But they can't pick at low-hanging fruit without having the kind of urban fibre infrastructure that a Neotel can give them. Mm-hmm. But once they have that in place, once they have it up and running, of course, if the deal does go through, then the second phase has to be to look at how to make fibre to the home more effective. But it's not going to be the priority.
Now, Arthur, obviously, fibre, a new territory and a new terrain for Vodacom potentially with Neotel. But obviously, Neotel sits with an extensive data centre. It sits with a strong skills base. How's this going to add to the Vodacom's success story?
There's certainly going to be duplication, but because the Neotel data centre is plugged directly into the CCOM undersea cable, and in fact the cable is managed from that data centre, that suddenly gives Vodacom far greater access to controlling international data and possibly bringing down their costs further. As far as personnel is concerned, there might be quite a bit of duplication between the various data centers. But Vodacom's data center certainly could do with some upgrade of skill as well.
I mean, let's get back to one of the prizes here is the spectrum, because both MTN and Vodacom are waiting for more spectrum from ICASA. They're waiting for the 800 gigahertz and 2.6 gigahertz, and I think it's Neotel that brings on the 800 gigahertz there, megahertz rather. So to talk to us about your views on whether the deal will go ahead if ICASA says that spectrum doesn't go with Neotel to Vodacom.
I think the spectrum would go with the deal because the spectrum isn't allocated based on exactly what the shareholding structure is for the organization. But you might find that there is broader opposition to the deal because of the spectrum. You might find that MTN and Telkom will lobby very heavily against the deal precisely because of the spectrum. And that's a bigger threat than the simple mechanics of the deal itself. The further issue that arises is that Neotel was created in terms of a second network operator having to be licensed in South Africa to provide fixed line services. Mm-hmm. By Vodacom acquiring Neotel, in effect the SNO, as it was originally called, disappears. So does that mean that there has to be a new process to find an SNO? Or does it prove that there wasn't actually the capacity in the economy for an SNO to succeed? Because the value of the deal, if it is indeed around $500 million, suggests that Neotel didn't create a truly competitive business, which was the intention of the SNO initially.
And that, of course, is what they're arguing, especially when they're arguing the Competition Commission case here, is that they create a greater competition in the South African context, and that's why a Competition Commission authority should be giving this deal the green light. So what are your thoughts in terms of what this means for their competitiveness and the threat that they could be posing to a Telkom?
I would agree that, in fact, Neotel as it stood was not really a highly competitive business. So if the intention is to create greater competition, by bringing Neotel's capacity into an organization like Vodacom, you do, in fact, allow for more active competition against Telkom in the fixed line space.
Mm-hmm. And of course, it's a business of scale. Thanks for joining us for that, Arthur Goldstuck from Worldwide Works.